The New York Giants wrap up their 2026 preseason slate with a few pressing questions still in need of answers.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. I am your host, Patricia Traina, and on today's Locked On Giants, we have made it, folks. It is the last preseason game. The New York Giants are the visiting team in their own home stadium. They face the New York Jets on Friday night, and there's still a few questions that the Giants need to answer. So up first, we're going to take a look at what some of those questions are as far as roster decisions go, and I'll give you my best guess as to how I think it's going to play out. Then in segment number 2, start 'em or sit 'em. Okay, we're back to this question again. I'm going to tell you why the Giants better start their starters. Even if it's just for a series or two or a quarter, I'll tell you why. And then finally, we will wrap things up with a flashback, if you will, a look at John Harbaugh's first training camp with the New York Giants, some surprises, and one concern to come out of the multi-week summer session. That's today's program. All right, let's get into the remaining questions. Now, you can argue that there are questions at every position, but these are the ones that I think are most pressing, that I don't think have been answered yet. And I'm going to start off with backup center, because I think that's kind of flying under the radar, and that's one of the more glaring ones. So the backup center comes down to Lucas Patrick, Brian Hudson, or Brendan James. Now, John Michael Schmitz, we know he's going to be the starter. You know, nobody really challenged him, so the job is his as long as he is healthy. Lucas Patrick, he's a veteran. He's the guy that I think the Giants would have liked to have had as their backup center, unquestioned backup center. But Lucas Patrick is not only on the wrong side of 30, he has also been dealing with knee issues. So I don't know if I would trust him to get through the season as the only backup center on the roster. But, you know, I don't know then again if he's improved with his knee issues. Maybe he's fine and, you know, they're just not saying. He certainly hasn't missed it much in terms of practice the last few days, so take it as a good sign. But then you have the question of the younger guys. Do you go with Brian Hudson or do you go with Brendan James? Brendan James added late to the mix. This is an interesting one because coming in, I thought Brian Hudson was the better of the run blockers. He's been okay, but the pass blocking hasn't been as sharp. You know, running the operation against the second and third teams, and 1 week he even got a starting assignment when John Michael Schmitz couldn't play. Hudson's been serviceable. But here's what I'm kind of wondering about this backup center situation. The Giants have 3 guys that you can make a case for. Do they maybe put one of them on the practice squad and look to trade another one? You know, I hear that John Harbaugh's brother Jim out in Los Angeles with the Chargers, they could use a center after losing their starting guy, you know, for the season with a knee injury. So if it comes down to that, who makes the most sense for the Giants? Well, I would think that Patrick is probably going to get the nod. He's probably going to get the 53-man roster spot. And I would think that James maybe gets a spot on the practice squad because you want to have a backup to the backup just in case Patrick's knee acts up again. You can't leave yourself without a center. Now, Aaron Stinney, if you need him in a pinch, he can play center, and I think he's going to make the team, but you probably want a pure center if you can. And I just wonder if maybe they look to trade Brian Hudson because I think down the line, if the Giants don't re-sign John Michael Schmitz, I can't help but wonder if maybe the plan down the line is to move Marcus Bowe to center. Let him train all next offseason. You know, it's too late to do it now, but he does have some center ability to him. So I wonder if maybe that's the long-term plan, and for the time being, they just need like a short-term plan to make sure that they have enough depth to get him through at the position. So that's what I'm wondering if the Giants do. But definitely backup center is one of the unresolved questions, I think, that this team needs to address. The starting cornerback role. Now, of late, Paulson Adebo has come back from his injury, and he's looked pretty good. So I suspect he's going to get one of the starting jobs. Now, the second starting job, does it come down to Deonte Banks or Greg Newsome? Banks has had a really, really good summer, folks, and he hasn't missed practice, and he hasn't missed a game. Newsome had to miss a game because of an injury. That one is really, really close to call. And, look, I can even see a scenario. I know I just said Adebo probably wins one of the starting jobs. I could see a scenario where you have Banks and Greg Newsome as your starters. Now, that being said, you're probably saying, well, what about Colton Hood? Colton Hood, he's still a little raw. He's going to be a starter at some point. I just don't think it's going to be right away. So if you put Banks and Newsome as your starters, those are two guys who are not signed beyond this year. Not a big deal, I suppose, because, if they outplay their, contract, you could always bring them back or try to bring them back. But I sometimes wonder if the plan for the long term is going to be Adebo, who is signed beyond this year, and Hood. And, maybe for the time being, they go with one of Banks or Newsome. Banks, to me, has had the better summer, but the coaches might feel differently, and kudos to Banks, by the way, for finally, pulling his head out of the sand and getting his act together. All right, obviously, wide receiver. Now, the Calvin Austin injury, that throws everything into kind of a tizzy, if you will. So I think the Calvin Austin injury now opens up a spot for Odell, who makes the team. I think Mooney might make the team. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I could see that being the case if they, unless they decide to try and trade him. The guys that I'm not really sure about, I don't know that Braxton Berrios makes the team. I mean, Berrios doesn't give them a whole lot on offense, and they have guys who can return kickoffs and punts. So I don't know if Berrios necessarily makes it. I still say Dalen Cambry makes it because, and some of you have said on the YouTube channel, you've said, oh, you put Dalen Cambry on the practice squad. Dalen Cambry has been not only one of the best receivers this summer, the most productive receivers this summer, he has also been one of the best special teams players. So you don't necessarily want to expose him. Now you're probably saying, he's going to go unclaimed anyway, but you never know, right? I mean, we didn't think anybody would want Falele or Joshua Azudu if they got cut, and look at what happened. So you never know. The Giants, they've been loaded in talent this year. So you can't automatically say, oh, you just slide him through to the practice squad. There's just no guarantee he's going to get to the practice squad. But yeah, I think the bottom of the receiver depth chart still needs to be sorted out. And you know what I'm kind of curious about? I know in my heart that Darius Slayton's going to make it. But given his contract and, how his production has been dipping every single year, I don't know. To carry him, I know you've got to, you can't cut him because of that contract. You'll eat a ton of dead money. But I just wonder if maybe his role is going to be further reduced. And it just seems like, and I like Slayton. You guys know I like Slayton. I have mad respect for him. But it just seems like that's a contract that they're never going to get their money's worth out of. So what do? You can't, at this point, you're not going to say, oh, you got to take a pay cut because he's got guaranteed money. But what do you do with him? Do you bump him down from the second receiver spot to the third? Guy doesn't give you anything on special teams. Odell doesn't give you on anything on special teams. At this point, maybe you want Odell ahead of Slayton. But at the same time, can you trust Odell to get through the entire season without any injuries or bumps or bruises? That's what the concern is. And Slayton, he's younger, and he's a little bit more durable, having, recovered from that sports hernia surgery that he had. So it's an interesting question for the coaches to try and figure out. And then, real quick, I'll just mention this for what it's worth. Defensive line. I am still not convinced that they have everybody they need on this roster. I still think the defensive line is going to be a top priority for the Giants. And actually, spoiler alert, a little later on in the program, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it because there's something of interest when I was putting the show notes together that I found about the defensive line that kind of had me going, you know? So defensive line is probably the other spot. But otherwise, if you saw yesterday's show, you saw what my 53-man roster projection was. I don't think I'm going to do another roster projection after the Jet game. Maybe what I'll do is I'll talk about anybody that might have helped themselves or hurt themselves. But yeah, still some questions that need to be sorted out. A lot of work still for the coaching staff and a lot of opportunity for the players to step up and answer the questions for the coaching staff. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, should the Giants play their starters in the preseason finale? I say absolutely, and I will tell you why when we come back. Hey, Giant fans, life gets busy, and figuring out what's for dinner every night can quickly become another thing on the to-do list. Home Chef takes the stress out of mealtimes by delivering fresh ingredients and easy-to-follow recipes right to your door. Whether you're looking to eat healthier, save money on takeout, or simply spend less time grocery shopping and meal planning, Home Chef makes cooking at home simple, convenient, and enjoyable. Home Chef offers more than 30 meal options every week, including calorie conscious and GLP-1 friendly meals, so that there is something for every schedule and lifestyle. And people really love it. Home Chef is rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And with my days getting busy again, I can't tell you how easy and convenient it is to have Home Chef meals in my refrigerator because I know what's going into each meal rather than having to guess what's in takeout food. And for a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Just go over to homechef.com/LockedOnNFL. That's homechef.com/LockedOnNFL to get 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/LockedOnNFL. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Giant fans, there are certain flavors that instantly feel like summer, and for a lot of people, those classic red, white, and blue freezer pops are right at the top of the list. Sweet cherry, lime, blue raspberry, it's one of those nostalgic summer flavors everybody recognizes. And now 5-Hour Energy is bringing that flavor combination into the new Fireworks Freeze 5-Hour Energy Shot, blending sweet cherry, zesty lime, and electric blue raspberry into one refreshing shot inspired by those iconic summer freezer pops. Most energy drinks kind of blur together after a while, but this one stands out because it actually feels fun and familiar. The cherry, lime, and blue raspberry combo really tastes like summer, and with summer schedules getting chaotic, having something quick so that you can just grab on the way out the door makes a huge difference. So ignite your taste buds with the flavor of the summer. Get a Firework Freeze 5-Hour Energy Shot today. For more information, please go visit 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. Locked On Giants is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America, and celebrating our 10th anniversary. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the Giants Media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And big welcome to our everydayers, our blue crew, as we call them, to the newcomers and everybody in between. Whether you're making us your first listen of the day or you're just spending a few minutes with us today, appreciate you. Appreciate everybody. All right, let's get back to today's show. We're going to take a look at the question of should the Giants start them or sit them? And I'm talking about their starters. You know how I feel, folks. Start them, play them. And I'm going to give you some reasons why. The Giants last played their starters, the majority of their starters, I should say, back in the first preseason game, which I believe was, I want to say it was August 13th, I think was the date. If they don't play the starters, even if it's just for a couple of series, if they don't play them against the Jets, they will have gone about a month in between live reps. And you have heard me say on this show before that you cannot simulate live reps in practice, especially if you're telling your guys don't tackle to the ground, don't hit the quarterback. You've got a bunch of restrictions that you don't have in a game. And that makes a difference because if a quarterback knows he's not going to get hit, he probably figures, oh, I got a few extra seconds to complete that pass, even though there's a defender standing right next to me. So that alone is reason to start them. But let me give you a few more reasons. The Giants in the past, they've had a couple of head coaches, Joe Judge and Brian Daboll, who are not really big on playing their starters in the preseason. And so they never came out and said this, but the attitude or the impression I got was they considered the first game or two of the regular season as an extension of the preseason, which used to drive me crazy because those games count towards the win-loss record and postseason. And you might remember in Joe Judge's first year, the Giants just barely missed the postseason. I think they missed it by 1 or 2 games or something like that. That had they maybe won those early games in the season, maybe that would have been made the difference. But I digress. So I went back and I looked up what the Giants did in their first 3 games under Judge and Daboll. Now, Judge was the coach before 2020 and 2021. The Giants went 0-6 in their first 3 games, which was 31st over that time frame, 2020 to 2021. Not good. Daboll, who was the head coach from 2022 to 2025, the first 3 games, they went 4-8, which was tied for 23rd over that span. Again, that 2022 to 2025 span. Not good. You cannot start slow. This team has got 2 difficult games in prime time, and they don't do well in prime time, by the way. So you cannot say, okay, we're going to wrap everybody in bubble wrap because we're afraid of injuries. Again, injuries don't discriminate when they happen. It's unfortunate. It's part of the game, though. We saw it with Calvin Austin. The poor Calvin Austin ended up getting injured on a grass field in practice in a controlled environment. You cannot be afraid to play your starters in a game. You know, you hope for the best, but you just can't put them in bubble wrap. So that being said, I think in particular, I would like to see the starting offense on the field for a couple of series or maybe even a quarter. Now, I went back and I looked this up. Jackson Dart has played 6 of his preseason snaps this year from the shotgun, and he's gone 3 of 4 and had 2 sacks. He has worked under center like a handful of times. I had True Media has him down for 3 times, and none of them were pass attempts. Also, with the shuffling or the reshuffling now at receiver, with the possibility that now Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be part of your mix, and the possibility that, maybe Darnell Mooney is going to be part of your mix. These are guys that maybe didn't take as many reps in practice with Jackson Dart. So why not get them all into a game? Again, you don't have to play them for the whole game. Don't treat it like, the old dress rehearsal where they used to play like 3 quarters and then they'd sit down for the last quarter. Even if you play them for a quarter, get Jackson Dart snaps under center and have him actually pass from under center. Get Odell in there to work with Jackson Dart. I mean, at this point, you pretty much have an idea what Malachi Fields can do. You pretty much have an idea what Isaiah Likely's going to bring. Have Jackson Dart work with some of these other receivers to build up chemistry in a game environment. It's so important. And I really, really hope that John Harbaugh, who again, he's not saying what his plan is, But I think Harbaugh's pretty smart, and he knows that it would be kind of stupid not to play the starters for, this last preseason game, because now you're then talking about almost 3 weeks, a little more than 3 weeks, I think, before the start of the regular season. That's a long time to go. And I appreciate, wanting to keep everybody healthy. Again, if you play Jackson Dart now, you got to put Andrew Thomas out there. And Andrew Thomas is a guy you don't really need to see because you know what you got in him. But you have to do it anyway. So we'll see what John Harbaugh decides. I think the starters will play. All right. How much they play, that I don't know. But I do think they're going to play. I think it makes sense to play them. On defense, maybe you could say, okay, you know what? DJ Reader doesn't need to play. Maybe, you could say the same thing for Brian Burns. The defense is a little further ahead than the offense. But the offense, in my opinion, I think they do need to play, even if it's just for a little bit. But again, we'll see what happens come game time. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, as preseason and summer training camp comes to a close, we're going to take a look at some of the biggest surprises and the one lingering concern that I have about this team moving forward. That'll be your way right after this.
Matt Derry here from the Locked On Lions podcast. Life insurance is one of those things you don't really think about until you have a reason to. For me, it really hit home when my father passed away over 20 years ago. You start thinking less about yourself and more about the people who depend on you and making sure they're taken care of no matter what. That's why I like Ethos. They make getting life insurance simple. It's 100% online, no doctor visits, no needles, none of that. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in just a few minutes, and even get same-day coverage. And honestly, that's huge because life gets busy. You can get up to $3 million in coverage, and some plans are as low as just $30 a month. It's just one of those things that gives you peace of mind knowing your family is protected. Take 10 minutes to get covered today with life insurance through Ethos. Get your free quote at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Applications may vary. Rates may vary.
All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. The all-new Locked On Giants Everydayer Club is here. You can join the Blue Crew for perks such as ad-free episodes, a newsletter delivered 5 times per week, invitations to regularly scheduled AMA calls, one-on-one texting with me, and access to the exclusive and toxic-free Blue Crew Discord channel. Get 1 month free when you sign up for an annual subscription. Details and sign up can be found at lockedonnygiants.supercast.com. All right, final segment here of today's Locked On Giants podcast, surprises and concerns that have emerged this summer. And let's be fair, there's been a lot of good to come from Giants training camp, a lot of good. And a couple of things that, still need to be sorted out. So you know what? Let me get the biggest concern out of the way, and then we'll finish up on a positive note. The biggest concern for me still remains the defensive line. Darius Alexander has not had the type of summer that I thought he would have. And then, I look at the defensive line, and right now, I question whether they have solid young depth on that unit. Now, currently, as it is stacked up, the average age of the defensive line is 28 years, which is the second oldest unit behind quarterbacks, believe it or not. And I'm talking about, how it's stacked up right now based on the 90-man roster. Now, based on my projected cuts for the defensive line of Harris, Reader, Alexander, Golston, Foku, and Bobby Jamison-Travis, who, by the way, I'm not sure if he makes the 53. I don't know if he's practice squad or not. The Giants now have an average age of 30.1 years if they go with that lineup, which makes it the oldest unit on the team. You want to get some young depth on there. So I still think the Giants will look to add somebody off the waiver wire, if not via trade. And I guarantee you, folks, defensive line is going to be a top priority in next year's draft. I don't see how it can't be. All right. So the guys they've got now, they can get through the season with them, but you're going to have to start planning for the future. All right. So the concern is out of the way. Now let's talk about the positives. Number one, Malik Neighbors' progress in returning from an ACL. Nobody, or I should say very few people thought Neighbors would be ready for the start of camp. But yet, not only was he ready, he hasn't had very many setbacks, if any setbacks, which is good. I mean, sometimes when guys are coming back off of an injury, they go out there, they practice, they're sore, and it's like, oh, we got to rest them for a couple days. That has not happened with Malik. Now, as for the other day when he left practice early, me personally, I think that was just a case of he was sore because that was his first real contact. Remember, he had been in the red jersey and he finally took it off and put on a regular jersey. So he was getting jostled a little bit more. And maybe it was a little bit of soreness, because sometimes you just got to get used to that. And they probably figured, okay, we need this guy. So let's not, beat him up too much right out of the chute. So I'm, until we hear otherwise from John Harbaugh, I'm not overly concerned about Neighbors having had a setback. All right, going forward, Deonte Banks has been a pleasant surprise. He finally got his head out of the sand. He's been playing with purpose. He's motivated. He's taken to this defensive system like a hand in glove. And most importantly, they finally found a position coach in Addison Lynch who has been able to get through to him. What we have seen from Deonte Banks is what the Giants thought they were getting when they drafted him in the first round back in 2023. And that only bodes well for the Giants. Now, you might say, oh, he's driven by his contract situation. And maybe that's true to a degree. But right now, he's not going anywhere. And the Giants are going to benefit from that. So if he ends up as a starter, the Giants come out ahead because they lit a fire under him. They got the right coaches and the right system for him. And Deonte Banks, unless something really crazy happens, and this is all a mirage, he could be a major contributor, reinforcing the back end of that defense, which, to be honest with you, I had questions coming into summer just how stable the back end of that defense was, particularly at cornerback. So Banks definitely is a pleasant surprise. The offensive line depth is a pleasant surprise. I mean, how many years have we been talking about how bad the offensive line depth was? And now all of a sudden, it looks like it's going to be Aaron Stinney and Marcus Bowe and J.C. Davis. How about him? And whoever the backup center is going to be, whether that's Hudson or James or Lucas Patrick, the Giants have legitimate backup depth. And that's why they were able to trade guys away. All right, which happens to be my next positive development from the summer, that they were able to trade Joshua Ezeudu and Daniel Falele and get something for those guys, not conditional picks, but actual draft picks that they can use. So Falele, they get an extra 6 next year, and for Ezeudu, they got a 7th in 2028. In the past, that doesn't happen. So kudos to John Harbaugh, who I think, obviously is behind that. I mean, Joe Schoen swung the trade, but as I've said before on the show, sometimes the coach will say, let me hang on to these guys because I know them. Let me get through the preseason and don't do anything. Harbaugh, not doing that. He's like, okay, you know what? These guys aren't going to fit. See what you can get for them. And that's a testament to the offensive line depth, as well as being proactive, something that the Giants have not been in recent years. So kudos to them on that. So that is my list of positives. Now, we could also talk about the defense, the pass rush. The defensive pass rush looks sick, folks. If that run defense does its part, the Giants, they could have scores of sacks this year. And wouldn't that be nice, right? So, last year the Giants were kind of like in the middle of the pack, league-wide in sacks. This year, again, if the run defense holds up and creates more pass rushing opportunities for those outside linebackers, look out. And by the way, let's hope that those outside linebackers all stay healthy. That's the other big thing. But overall, you got to like what the Giants did this summer. They possibly even found their new kicker for the long term, Dominic Zavada, who I think is going to, win that competition. They've got themselves a Derrick Henry light. They got themselves a promising young quarterback in Jackson Dart. They've got themselves some good receiving targets. Isaiah Likely, once Malik comes back, he'll be in there. Obviously, Malachi Fields. So just so much to like about the way this Giants team shaped up this summer. Now they got to do it when it comes to the regular season game. That's where it's going to count the most. So that's where we'll need to see if the Giants, what they did in the summer was a mirage or if it was real. All right, Giant fans, before we say goodbye, I will have one more quick show for you after the Jet game. It'll be a short show, just some quick takeaways and how, certain battles might have played out. Then roster cuts will be announced by Sunday at 6 p.m. So I will have a takeaway show for you then on the roster cuts, kind of breaking all that stuff down. Also, the Giants squad show will be airing on Friday after the game. It'll be Brandon Olson, Gene Clemens, Jay Fudge. All right, so they'll be your panel. And we will continue, obviously, here on Locked On Giants to bring you all things Giants. So I want to thank you for tuning in. Again, if you made us your first listen of the day, appreciate that. If you just spent a few minutes, appreciate that as well. I will see you after the Jets game. Also, again, don't forget to check out the squad show after the Jets game. Have a good one, Giant fans.